South African Cities Open Data Almanac, or SCODA, is a city-centric data portal that provides evidence, analysis, and insight to current and comparable information about South African cities. SCODA is a city-centered approach to addressing urban data needs related to planning, management, monitoring, and reporting to realize more efficient and effective data systems and processes in cities. The platform provides a suite of data tools, including the Codebook, Data Explorer, and Data Story tools, which provide additional analytics and insights into the data. Comparable data from all cities can be downloaded from scoda.co.za free of charge. The South African Cities Network, with its long-standing partner, the Open Cities Lab, provides data support and capacity building for cities through the SCODA program. The SCODA program supports cities with actualizing data culture, realizing data systems and architecture, rationalizing data, information, and knowledge, building data capacity, and supporting and integrating effective data governance. Instead of building from the ground up, the SCODA program uses the SCODA framework to assist participating cities with developing city data portals. The city of eThekwini became the first South African city to make its data open and accessible in an interactive platform. Durban Edge is an interactive portal for evidence-based decision-making for business leaders, the public sector, investors, and other stakeholders. Following a similar model, the city of Ekurhuleni launched its open data portal, which displays information such as population and demographics through maps and graphs. The SCODA program also assists cities with data capacity assessment and training on data knowledge management, contributing to data systems and architecture realization. The SCODA program includes data pipeline mapping and process reengineering, which can lead to outputs like the City of Johannesburg's service delivery dashboards, which are currently under development. Reach out to the South African Cities Network to discover how we can assist you to become a data-driven city.
It's supposed to be a video. Is there another video coming before?
Thank you for joining Open Up as we introduce one of our flagship technology projects, Vulekamali. In 2017, Open Up began working with the National Treasury on this open budget portal. Building on South Africa's continually strong ranking within the Open Budget Index, National Treasury was seeking to reimagine how South Africa approached access to information for public spending transparency. Vulekamali became the solution. Vulekamali is a groundbreaking example of collaborative technology design and development. National Treasury, Open Up, and Imali Yethu came together to take a transformative approach to open data design. Imali Yethu is a coalition of civil society organizations driven by an interest in promoting budget transparency and public participation, who alongside Treasury drove the strategic direction and scope of the project as it unfolded. Open Up, as a non-profit technology house, developed the underlying technology with a strong emphasis on transparency and citizen-centered tech design. Citizen participation has been a central guiding light throughout development. Through nationwide civic information drives, we were able to both gather significant amounts of user feedback for development, whilst also driving awareness of the platform for use. This has both pushed the boundaries on the types of data sets made proactively available through the site, whilst also contributing to its steady usage, with close to 3,500 citizen users in an average month last year. The site gives citizens the practical opportunity to oversee government spending wherever they are, helping to provide accountability and oversight, but also enabling them to inform their everyday lives with access to relevant, timely and quality budget and financial data. The website itself has many significant features, but its strongest focus is on data accessibility and advancing participation. There are a variety of information and data sets provided for, as well as creative multimedia learning resources. Vulekamali remains a flagship for the future of multi-stakeholder developed technology for advancing social good. We invite everyone to explore and interact with South Africa's budget and financial information through the portal.
Thank you so much, Program Director, and I would also extend the same courtesy to the invited guests. I know there's a master class, but just to set the tone of our discussion, I think two things I want to share with you. I've always been fascinated by the relationship between data, information, and knowledge. And this transition is a very important one, and sometimes I think most misconstrued. As the program director had already mentioned, there's a lot of data being collected with whatever we do, and that also extends to municipalities, including the cities. The question is, how do we turn that data into information, and even more importantly, knowledge? Because consequently, it's the knowledge that we use to make the decision. The second thing is that the transition really is supposedly a simple one. So it's about collection, more importantly, collation. There's several cell phones in here. How do we put that data together? Then you move to processing. From processing, it's actually analyzing it. And then there's this, I think maybe we're going to even actually exploit with the panel where we actually have results, which is basically a summary of what they've said. But there's also what we can call, for lack of a better term, as findings, which is an interpretation of what actually is reported. So if they say something is rising or dropping, what does that mean? And I've always thought that could be the frustration of our decision makers, because if we just give them results, it may not be sufficient to set the stage on how they should actually make the decision. Without actually going into much detail, I think I'm going to begin by introducing my very able panel. And I'll start from the extreme. Ms. Mahoney, trained actuarial scientist. Let's get scared here. But with a lot of experience in data analytics, banking and insurance, investments, financial planning. She's project-oriented, client-focused, and makes decisions. And just probably to actually add on, I think she's a board member of SA Cities, and what I would actually want to explore from her is much more on the leadership when you actually have to speak to these particular issues of data. Then it's Ayanda. Again, let's get scared here. Ayanda is in artificial intelligence, and at the moment is actually is the lead for Microsoft South Africa. So he leads a team that works across industries to data-driven strategies to deliver value add. AI has become something that is actually quite topical. And by the way, we know it's there, but for very few of us know what that is. So we would probably try and take you, we would depend on you to try and explain to us some more. He spent time in the private sector, which is really helpful. Cities are the private sector, and started his career in local government. What a fantastic fit. Ayanda, really, I think one of the things I want to explore with you is much more on innovation. How can we use the innovation, the AI, machine learning, and so on and so forth to actually convert the data that is collected to knowledge that we should use for decision making. Then I move on to Ms. Chipeya. Ms. Chipeya is a senior research advisor at eThekwini, Economic Development Unit, and she heads up the city's economic program. In her time at eThekwini, has been responsible for conceptualizing the country's first interactive city open data portal. I think it was part of the video. And oh, sorry, I almost lost my thought. She's responsible for the production and delivery of the State of Economy overview, and obviously that also comes with how we actually use the data that had to come from the lockdowns, the July unrest, the flooding. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with eThekwini. It's been in the focus. One of the things that I'm actually going to pursue with you is actually I want to sort of mix it up with the innovation. We coming from the traditional kind of data gathering and reporting, which was paper-based, et cetera. I'm not going to go into details on some of the departments we've gone to, and they have to look for these files before they can actually find. So what were the challenges around that, and how does now the innovation comes in to actually simplify that, which will actually seem to be a very difficult process? Of course, we can't tie out research from data. In fact, I've always thought that my qualifications, my specialty, and my interests actually border around research. And we're going to be joined virtually by Dr. Visagie. He's a senior research specialist in inclusive economic development in the Human Sciences Research Council. He's an expert in macro data analysis and has worked on an array of cross-sectional, longitudinal household data sets. I think I also thought that it would be important what is in his recent research projects covers issues of regional economic development, city regional economies, as well as tradable services, spatial inequalities and inclusion, and so on and so forth. Welcome, Dr. Visagie. We're really proud to have you. Now, to kick the ball rolling, I think I'm going to start with Ms. Chipeya. Walk us through the challenges and how you've actually tried or attempted to come out of those challenges and actually take a route that sort of starts to put this together.
Thank you, Dr. Wotela, and thank you to everyone who's joined as well. So I have a lot to say, and I'm hoping to be able to channel my thoughts because there's so much, on the journey that we've been along. But I would just like to say, yes, I am from eThekwini Municipality, and everybody's quite aware of a lot of the challenges we've experienced in eThekwini Municipality and in the economy, and data has been so beneficial to us. Not just data, but the process of gathering data and having a program where we can analyze the data and communicate the data. But just to take a step back, so I ran a program called the Durban Edge program. It stands for Economic Development and Growth in eThekwini. This is, I'll get to the open data portal, but this is a SCODA portal. So this was co-created with SACN as well as OCL. But so the Durban Edge program, we have had it for a couple of years. It's been around since 2011/2013, even before my time at eThekwini. And what it was a program where we interact and interface with business and decision makers, economic decision makers, and provide them with economic intelligence. So not just the data, but the actual intelligence of what this means for your business, or to counsel what decisions you should be making, etc. And what we used to do at the time is we used to produce quarterly publications, and we used to in those publications report on certain data, GDP, water data, electricity, whatever, but it was either a PDF file or it was a printed, sort of like a publication magazine kind of thing. And then over time, it just became evident that we needed almost like a repository, or we needed all this very valuable information that was being collected almost in a time series format, so we could understand what this means over time. What do these trends mean? How can we influence decision making with the trends, etc.? And we also needed to become more innovative. So thank God, SCODA, the SACN was working on the SCODA program at the time at the city level, and we were partners with OCL as well, so we had a beautiful partnership that came along. And that's how we got to developing the Durban Edge Open Data Portal. So it was a challenge at the time because, now, thank God, we have the city Strat Hub. that most people have heard of at the city level, which is, encompasses all different data from different departments, whatever. But at the time, we didn't have that kind of thing. In fact, we had to knock on offices and go to people and ask for, I remember even the irritation from some people, like, you want me to open my boxes of information, of permits, whatever. And we had to, together with SACN and OCL, kind of work on getting people around the table and, to warm up to the fact that, there is a need to digitize your data. There's a need for us to be able to use your data to inform decision making. So I think in the beginning, we started out with 2 data sets. We have about 23 right now. We started out with 2 data sets. I think it was building plans and, I can't remember what the other one was. Very valuable data sets. But over time, people started to warm up. And also what we very specifically, intentionally do is we take the data, we present the data to decision makers, and we say, this is what's happening in the economy, this is what needs to be done. I'm hoping to speak about the flood and whatnot later on and how we use data. So over time, more data, more people started providing more of that data to us, and we would upload it on the portal and create data stories and whatnot. So for now, that's what I'll say. There's a whole lot more where that came from, but that's just that's just the background.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the points I would actually probably reflect to the whole issue of using a PDF. If you find that there's a mistake, you have to go correct it and reissue it. By that time, the media has picked up a wrong statistic. There's also the question, and I always laugh when we actually go in a monitoring class. Monitoring is supposed to create extra work for the people that we're supposed to just generate it. For example, if you come into this building, you actually use your access card. Your access card should be able to capture that you've come, rather than actually having to stand at the door and start writing out. I've always laughed. I mean, I'm sure by now you know the whole speed limits. I mean, someone has to stand on the road and try and pick it up. So it's like, why not just fit something to the car that to be able to tell you that actually when you're driving in a particular road, you are actually over the speed or not, rather than actually get... So the whole notion of actually dealing with data, information, and knowledge from a traditional point of view is definitely problematic. And this is where I think, Ayanda, you come in. What's the limit to the innovations when it actually comes to the whole value chain of data collection, collation, processing, analysis, reporting, and so on and so forth?
Thank you so much, and good morning to everybody. I think, and maybe let me demystify the whole issue of machine learning and AI. It's actually quite simple when you think about the use cases. And then it becomes not such a scary term. I think in our normal course of life, we generate tons of data. I think the program director mentioned earlier on, your cell phone is just a huge data magnet, right? As you're walking around and where you go and who you're with, you're collecting data. And I think as cities, we collect data as well. Where machine learning and AI begins to come in is to simplify the process of getting insights from that data a lot quicker. So automating, some of the decision making that's coming in from that data. As data sets are becoming much larger and larger, many people are starting to say, don't tell me what happened. So don't describe things to me on data. Tell me what I should do. Right? So lead me to a decision. So people are starting to leverage, and then we then leverage cognitive services to start telling you what you should do. I'll make a simple example in workforce planning. For example, in maybe a safety environment in a typical city where data is telling you where the hotspots are, where the problematic areas are, whether it's crime or accidents or incidents that are happening. And in many cases, we collect this data, we have it. And in many cases, we present to leaders what happened last month, what happened last week. We have ministers telling us about statistics about everything that happened, which is really, really cool to understand it. But AI, machine learning, could present opportunities to start to inform us, to tell us where we should be deploying resources in order for us to combat some of what the patterns in data have started telling us. And looking through those huge data sets and applying algorithms, leveraging machine learning and AI, could then start to tell us what to do rather than tell us what happened, right? This is that we start to make data-led decisions and not so much who makes the biggest noise in the community, where we go and leverage resources. We start being more informed by data in terms of where we go deploy resources. And this is true, for some of the challenges facing cities right now from a critical infrastructure perspective. You think of the challenges we have with water, with electricity, with sanitation, and many cities are grappling with the challenge now, and we saw it here in Gauteng. We don't have a shortage of water, but we don't have enough water going into households.
Yeah.
Right? And then they tell you the dams are 85, 90% full, and you ask yourself, then what's happening, right? And data is able to be leveraged in that case to say, where are we losing water? If we're losing water, if we can't get it there, and what are the driving factors behind it? And how do we collect sensory data to inform us where we should be focusing on, whether from a proactive maintenance perspective, or from where we should be protecting the loss of water, or where we should be running education within communities. And all of these decisions in terms of what we do, the questions we asked about data from a critical infrastructure perspective help us to make the right kind of decisions in order for us to leverage and do that. And staying within the water challenge, which is quite topical at this stage, we leveraged probably data at the time when we were building dams and the encatchment areas where we catch water and pump it to the dams. And have we checked the data today in terms of climate change, everything that's happening, have the goalposts changed?
Yeah.
Right? What is the sensory data, the external data that is not sitting in the city, that's not even sitting in South Africa, sitting in research centers, telling us about where we should be planning? What are the next generation of catchment areas for water, given how things have changed so much in as much as climate change is concerned? And this is where we can leverage the power of data from a planning perspective to ensure that in the long term, when we talk sustainability, we can drive the right sustainable investments and sustainable initiatives that will protect some of the scarce resources that we have at the moment.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that actually sort of, when you actually mentioned, tell us what we should be doing rather than describing what has happened is actually quite a fantastic way of putting it, because it starts to feed into the whole aspect of decision making. The question is, how can we be innovative? Because at the moment, we're collecting so much data, and that should actually be used. And I think this is where maybe the sort of the pillar or the way research comes in. And I just want to turn to Dr. Visagie and try and actually walk us through, how does research hold all this together in terms of especially probably the analysis part of it, the reporting, and turning that into knowledge rather than just actually having information that is there for us to know this is what has happened rather than what should we do about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. See my face out there on the big screen. I hope I'm coming through clearly. I think, as you've said, and as Ayanda alluded to, there's lots of data out there, a lot of data flows. But of course, data in and of itself is not necessarily going to help us answer the questions that we're interested in, and it won't necessarily even get us to the right solution. And so having the right sort of partners on board is absolutely critical in moving data into something that's usable and that can help advance society in particular ways. And I have two reflections. The first is that, unfortunately, in our sort of compliance-driven, heavily regulated environment, sometimes it is very difficult to partner with credible institutions. And so sometimes cities get locked into a series of tendered commissions that don't look strategically at their partners in their local area, don't consider about building long-term capabilities over time. And so I think it's critical that cities are paying attention to who are their local knowledge partners, and how can they put in place structures that will enable them to partner rather than just commissioning work on an ad hoc basis. And I think a related point to that is that often a lot of the value from the research community is not just in the ability to run the models and do the statistics, but also to help cities and leaders and policymakers think about the questions that they need to ask in the first place, right? So there's a huge and immense value in having those key critical thinkers that can help actually at the very onset of the thinking around a particular project, help inform and shape the agenda. So I think it's about a close collaboration, close partnership, working with the research community to make an impact. But while I've got this stage, being mindful of time, I would like to also give one quite strong provocation today to everyone there. And that comes from my background as an economist, thinking about economic data in cities. And it's just to say that for us to be talking about evidence-based planning, evidence-based policy, we need the evidence to start off with. And I think that at the moment in South Africa, what's underappreciated is that we do not have that database when it comes to the economy at all. And that's because Statistics South Africa are only geared towards giving subnational economic indices at a provincial level at best. So just to give you a concrete example, what's the GDP of eThekwini? What's the GDP of Johannesburg? Well, you might see answers out there in the public space, but the truth is that they're based upon some commercial company that have modeled data, haven't published their methods, and in many respects, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? Because Statistics South Africa at this point in time aren't geared towards providing that municipal economic data. And so there's a big role for cities to play themselves and thinking carefully about what sources of data they do have, whether it's from their indicators around their rate space, electricity usage, thinking about all these sources to plug that gap. But I'd like to hold up the flag to say, I think there needs to be a lot more advocacy from local cities, local people interested in the urban agenda to say we need better economic data, because without the data in the first place, we're not going to be able to produce the right policy. And it's a bit like having all the right processes and the fancy methods, but the foundation very much being undermined. And so, of course, I've got quite a few ideas as to where we do look and how we do plug the gap. But I think we need to have a healthy scrutiny as to what are we really reporting on when we're talking about the local economy in cities, because at the moment, Statistics South Africa simply do not provide that information. Thanks.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, you mentioned three probably important things. The first is the issue of partnerships. Then I think the key word here is strategic. Then obviously the whole problem of subnational. I mean, it shouldn't even be at city level, it should be to the communities. Because at city level, it's still such a big aggregate for us to know what is happening in Alex, Diepsloot, etc., etc. Now, one thing I've come, or rather the way I always want to describe the so-called public policy is that it's got 5 components. And those 5 components are actually they begin with, if we put them according to what comes first, even though this may actually be debatable, is that it's leadership, right? Then we need governance. Then we need, obviously, the political economy, basically speaking to the resources and how you use them. Then it's institutions and organization arrangements. Now, I deliberately name them like that because if you're going to move anything through public policy, it basically means that the first gear is leadership. What would be the role of leadership in this data use and being innovative and actually making it to be used?
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. I mean, I think very simply, it really is a simple answer for me in my experience, which is predominantly in having built data and analytics capabilities. And that is that leadership is absolutely critical. It's at the heart of it. It's the starting point of all of it. In my mind and in my experience, the true success of any data or analytics capability, team, whatever you want to call it, it comes down to the extent to which the insights and the output that capability has generated, as we've said already, are used. And that is directly linked to, in my mind, sort of two things, and I think they're two sides of the same coin. One of them is how effectively that output links to the strategic objectives of the primary stakeholder or client who sort of wants that insight. But secondly, how well the insight and the output is communicated and translated for that community. And very simply what I mean by that is you can have very large-scale teams sitting producing hordes of dashboards and fancy, shiny things. If they are not used, it's not useful. It's entirely pointless. That team serves no purpose. And whether that information is going to be used comes down to actually whether it is useful to the end client. And a lot of this for me actually sits critically with leadership. And there's two levels of leadership. I think it's leadership from the analytics capability level. So is that your chief data officer, your analytics head, your data head, whatever you want to call them. It's really very much of a muchness in my mind. But also their leadership above that. I think leadership sets the tone and the culture first and foremost, for that capability and its success. It's about things like leadership itself leading from the front in actually demonstrating their belief in a fact-based decision-making. I also temper that by saying it should not only be about the facts and the data and the analytics and the insight. You do need a healthy measure of gut and experience in that, in my experience. It's about ensuring that there are adequate budgets available and financials. This sort of thing, doesn't just happen off the side of a desk for free. You do need resources to do it. And critically, it's about the optimization of the intersection and the integration of people, process, and technology. And that also needs to be driven through leadership. At the analytics level, in my mind, it's also about identifying the right person for the job. We often are under the impression that perhaps there is a scarcity of data skills in South Africa. In my opinion, absolutely not. I think there's an abundance and an oversupply of data and analytics leaders. But is there a shortage of data and analytics leaders with the right skill set that is actually needed? Because again, I say it's not just about producing the numbers, it's about being able to communicate what those numbers mean. It's the so what of it at the end of the day. And for that, I think analytics leaders, you need almost a little bit of a unicorn, a hybrid. You need somebody who technically, obviously, is proficient and can do the job at the end of the day, but that doesn't mean they have to be the best data scientist, statistician, mathematician, whatever it might be. You need somebody who effectively can communicate with the end stakeholder. In my mind, it is not an analyst's job or an analytics leader's job to sit and have a data conversation with their client. It is their job to sit and have a strategy conversation, ultimately about what I call their business. Yep. And what keeps them up at night? What are their problems? It's then their job to take that back and translate that into what the data and the analytics needs to do to help them achieve whatever their objectives might be, solve whatever their problems might be. So from a leadership perspective, you need leaders who come with strong skills in communication, in collaboration. And as I say, it almost feels at a certain level, the technical skill sort of becomes secondary to that. Because actually, as I said up front, if you're producing a whole lot of information that never gets used, it doesn't really matter, does it, at the end of the day? It's also about leaders' ability to foster a culture of curiosity, a culture of innovation. Very often, the flip side of that kind of a culture can be one of persecution, because if you are producing facts that are potentially contrary to public opinion, to what might be popular out there, it can be a very uncomfortable position to be in, and you need leaders who can create a culture of safety, who can foster a culture of curiosity and innovation. At the same time, I think you need leaders who will drive collaboration, who will drive the willingness to share and collaborate, not just across the public sector, but with the private sector, with academia, because I think, again, that talks to the optimization of your resources, and how you don't always, as for example, the public sector, have to actually be doing the work. You can actually have the private sector be doing the work on behalf of you and sharing it with you. And that talks to your leadership, again, to their agenda, to the culture and the tone they're setting. So, as I say, very simply in my mind, leadership is absolutely critical. It's where it starts, it sets the tone, it sets the culture. I think if you're going to ask an analytics leader, a data scientist, an analyst, whoever it might be in the space, to try to achieve all of that on their own, in the absence of a champion driving that for them and leadership driving it for them, they're not going to be successful. It's going to be impossible.
I think I want to advance our discussion and talk about the broader aspects. And I'll begin by actually setting a scenario. For ethical reasons I won't mention. There was a country that collected census data in 1990. And in the 90s, it used to take almost 5 years to process that data. So you have the results probably 1995 for what you collected in 1990. And at that time, the following year, there was a shorter version of a survey. I'm sure some of you might be familiar with what is called the Demographic and Health Survey. I don't know if they still do it. I know South Africa used to participate. Because it was a shorter version, they collected their data in 1992, and they had the results the following year before the census results were coming out. And that data showed that there's a problem of infant mortality. Children are dying. And then the leader said, the surveys always mislead us. We have to wait for the census.
Yeah.
So we waited 2 more years to actually come and prove that indeed
there is a problem.
Children were dying. And that was why I mentioned 1990. That's the time HIV/AIDS was just setting in. And 1995 came, and then they realized that the problem is real. So the question I have, and I think this is generally to the whole panel members, what's the state of use of data in decision making? Is it based on empirical, or is it actually political? Or it's just, I'm the most educated in the room, so I'm going to tell you what needs to be done.
If I can just jump in on that one. I like that question, and I also like the last speaker, what she was saying, especially about the leadership issue, because I think it does need to be empirical, but you also need political will as well. And I'd just like to say on there that for me, I feel that the data processes and the systems and the technology, whatever, all of that really just should be there to support a program or to support some form of system where, decisions are made.
Yeah.
It really shouldn't be the end goal. The end goal is the making of the decisions. So, for example, in our case, which I'll keep on referring to, we are required every single quarter to produce a state of the economy publication.
Yeah.
We are required to inform decision makers on that. Like it or not, we have to, every time there is something that's happening in the economy, there's unrest, there's whatever, we're called on, we're required to present on what is the data saying, etc., that kind of thing. Most of the time we like to think that they do listen to, and they do, actually, to be fair, they do. On the flooding issue, they really did. And some of the other issues. But I think you do need both. I don't think that there should be a discounting of political will at all, because it's exactly what she was saying. If you have the capability and the empirical results and whatever, but you don't have the political will, you don't have people listening to you, and it's as good as nothing. You have shiny platforms and whatever else, and it's as good as nothing. But I just wanted to squeeze in one or two comments, and you can feel free to stop me when you want to. But I just wanted to say, in terms of data, I think also it's important that we have a hybrid of approaches. So we definitely need automated systems, so we don't have that 1990, 1995 situation you spoke about.
Yeah.
But we also need to incorporate data systems in, when we have incidents happening in the economy, we must actually go out and survey people.
Yeah.
People need to feel like when my house was flooded, not somebody came to me necessarily, might be a link, maybe an SMS or whatever, or maybe someone came to me.
Yep.
But they need to feel, in our experience, they need to feel like, oh, they listened to me, kind of thing. And I gave them my GPS coordinate, I told them where I live, whatever, and now it's on a map and I can see myself and whatever. We need that overlaid also with our GIS data, which tells us where the flood lines are. We need that overlaid also with our business database, as also in some instances, you need the automated systems. Then you need the existing data that's been there all along to tell you where, your valuation role. Then you need people to tell you this is what happened in my life at the time, whatever. And when you overlay all of those, then that's like the sweet spot of where you can really inform decision makers of this is what's happened, this is what's likely to happen in the future if you don't do anything about it, these are the costs of it, etc., etc. I had a comment on the GDP data from Justin, but I think I'll pause on that because.
Okay, Ayanda, would you also want to speak?
Yeah, maybe if I can weigh in as well and comment from a leadership perspective. I think one thing I've always felt is that you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And in many cases, it will be upon us as practitioners to educate our leaders, right? In terms of asking the right questions and leading with evidence, but linking that evidence to outcomes in order to drive ownership from a political perspective, so that you can connect the outcomes to political agendas to drive ownership. I think that's how we're going to bridge the gap between what practitioners see, what practitioners observe as things to be done with the political will, right? How do you connect outcomes to political will? And in cities, and looking what some of the guys have done, including eThekwini, is working back from that, working from the strategic priority that has been set. One is either to validate what's been there, to say it is indeed a priority, it's a problem, we can support it with evidence, or saying, by the way, this one, we don't think it's that much of an issue. You should be better off focusing there. And leveraging evidence in order to do that, and leveraging data to do that, and coming in and we're not going to do this in a vacuum, right? I think Doc mentioned it earlier to say there's never a complete set of data. Statistics South Africa have a point-in-time data, right? In terms of maybe the GDP of the country, and we can try to look at the data and say maybe we can reduce it to a city, but people in a city don't live in a city, they live in a ward. They live in a community. They want to know what's happening in my community. And this is where external data starts to come in. The anonymized data coming in either from the revenue services or coming in from labor, from some of the community-based organizations doing work. How do we aggregate that data? It goes back to partnerships. We're never going to get to a point where we have everything figured out at once. But the partnership, how we shape the partnership as practitioners, as leaders, linking them to outcomes, will get us closer to something that can be localized, that I, as a member in a community, can relate to, right? When you talk about me, and it's me, it's my councillor, it's my unemployed constituency right here, right now, what we want to see is about us, not about the city. We are not the city at that point, we are this community. How do you aggregate that data in order to inspire confidence for me?
I want to sort of sum up that. I think in a way there's two words, if we have to be more communicative. There are two things here. There's demand and supply of data. So basically, I think at the moment we've been talking about how we can supply So the question is there actually that demand for it? Now, Justin, and I think you brought up Stats SA already of saying that they're good to give us the national data, but I think the sub-national is gone. To that, I also want to just include the fact that our governments and most African governments are actually using the Roman statute type of government. That's why we have the legislature, the legislature, the executive, as well as the judiciary, right? Now, we also know that data is supposed to help us learn. And yet, we've heard of stories where we spend 5 million rands to do an evaluation, the results look so bad, and we use this very nice word called embargo. No one sees that until probably later on. Is that the way we should be doing this, Justin?
Yeah, the conversation's entered into an interesting space, but I think an important one, and that is that we can't separate what we would like to think is just the objective empirical work of analysts out there with the political economy of it. And I think it comes in at all levels. So it comes in at the top from the leadership in terms of which sorts of questions get asked and get airtime in the first place. And then it also comes down to the analysts themselves. We can try and be as objective as we want, but we're always approaching any particular question through that lens. And I think the best thing we can do is just have that level of self-awareness to understand that there is a political economy in all that we do. But I also don't think we should get too disillusioned to think that it won't and it can't matter, right? And I think one of the power of data and data-driven evidence is that it can be mobilized by a range of groups who can use it to lobby and leverage. So sometimes you do find that communities can get ignored and their needs can get pushed under the table. But hopefully, as we create more of a transparent and open access sort of environment that different civic organizations, etc., can publicize, and we can start seeing this lobbying happen from the ground up. So I think it applies at all levels, and I think that I think in this panel and particularly the city leaders that we have represented here should be commended for the excellent work that they are doing to try the best that they can to get the data there. I'm sure that sometimes they get very frustrated with what gets used and what doesn't. But I hope that over time that it does build up a critical mass that ultimately leads to change. But yeah, we should be realistic about the political economy. Thanks.
Thank you. Top down, bottom up. How are we going to create a society that actually can appreciate demand empirical evidence?
So, I mean, I don't think it's either or. I think it's a combination of the two, in my mind. And there's a few things I want to maybe touch on in the comments that have been made, and perhaps to sort of indirectly answer what you've just asked. But I think one of the important points for me that also stands out about leadership, and I probably should have mentioned it, and it came through in the example you gave about the infant mortality, is the importance also of ethical leadership.
Yes.
Particularly given the nature of the data that you'll be working with in this space, particularly given the nature of the techniques that you might be applying to that data, like AI, like machine learning, which often unintentionally can by their very nature just introduce bias into the work you're doing. And I think you're already operating in a very challenging space with potential areas of mistrust, distrust, etc. And that can then only be exacerbated. So I think another just important aspect of that leadership is ethical leadership and setting the tone from that. And links a little bit, I guess, to what I said about practitioners potentially working in a space that can be somewhat challenging if there isn't a culture of fact-based decision making being driven from the top. So I think that was the one point I wanted to make. In terms of your question of is data, are the insights being used, applied, etc. I think yes, and I think it's to varying extents in different circles. It's obviously a very complex system you're working with sort of private sector, public sector, academia, etc. And I think if you look at each of those almost individually, you'll have varying levels to which insights and so forth are used and potentially even shared. And I think one of the challenges for us also as leaders in the space is to start to create more publicity around some of the examples that are happening, because I also think it's not all necessarily doom and gloom as we've also just said, and I do think there's a lot of great work happening out there that perhaps people are also just simply unaware of because it's not getting the airtime it needs, and that's another aspect and responsibility of leadership. To your question around demand, and why I say top down and bottom up combined, because I do think there is the onus on leadership, and very often leaders don't know the questions to ask, which I think is what I understand. It's our job to help guide them, sort of without them knowing we're guiding them as to what the questions are that they need to be thinking about. But it is their job to also, and I think we've said this, prioritize those questions, because you cannot possibly get to everything all of the time. But from a bottom-up perspective, and maybe I'll leave with a sort of closing provocative thought, is that I think a very successful practitioner analyst is one who is able, through their work, to create demand. And that is actually what you ultimately want to end up doing.
Okay. The program director has told me I have 6 minutes, and I think it would be unfair if I don't just get one question from the audience for the members of panel. Burning issue. There we are.
Thank you. My name is Marhawi, and I'm part of the Cities Network. I think for me, from maybe just two related questions from my own experience. One is, and it's related to what Siobhain was saying, and also Justin, when you engage with cities around how they go about either preparing or reviewing their long-term city development strategy and make very serious investment commitments, particularly around the economy, it's actually quite scary to see how those decisions are based on a very thin evidence. For example, historically, that particular municipality might think the economy is based, the core of the economy is driven by perhaps large industrial base, but if you look at the details and some information, there might have been some structural shift over recent period. But significant decisions and significant investments are actually made around the economy based on a very thin data. So I don't know if you can share from your own experience around those long-term strategic decisions that cities make and the implications of that in either changing or not changing or transforming the economy. And I think the other one is from my experience of working in informal settlements, particularly with community collected data, previously with Slum Dwellers International, or SDI. What we realize is and I think it's the same with municipalities, there's very little quality information about the excluded areas like informal settlements. And most of the data that you find is actually data meant for monitoring purpose, like reporting vertically upwards to Treasury and it's just there's very little information around, for example, if municipalities report around a number of toilets that they've provided to informal settlements, just in terms of the quality of the toilets, the status of the toilets, the adequacy of those toilets, and it's the same around all the different basic services. So I don't know if you have anybody from the panel has any thoughts how we can also use data to make sure we make these kind of excluded, invisible areas, parts of our city, visible through data. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So 2 issues: strategic planning, long-term, inclusion, which is with the informal sector. Who would want to take that, members of Parliament?
I'll take the strategic planning one because of being in the economic development unit in my municipality. I would like to say that I see there are examples of cities who don't use enough data when they make investment decisions, etc. But I do want to say that it's not all doom and gloom in some instances, at least in our instance anyway. And I think it is up to the leaders to demand facts before they make those decisions. For example, in our case, when we make different decisions, etc., we do show the location of businesses, for example, because that will impact on, if you want to build a road here or whatever the case might be, that will impact on, it will impact the businesses where they are, etc., the sector of businesses as well, the number of people that they employ as well. We are pressured to have an up-to-date business database as much as possible, and also to have informal businesses in those databases. I do agree with you on the informal sector. By the way, I do feel that in general, in cities, the information on the informal sector is not as strong as it should be. And I think that is an area where maybe our partners and also our leaders can pressure, as well, add pressure to that area. So I do think that it isn't all doom and gloom. I feel that there are many instances where investment decisions are made without that, without enough insight. But there are pockets of excellence, unfortunately still pockets, but there are pockets of excellence of cities that do make decisions based on actual data. For example, in our case, we have spatialized economic data where we don't just make a decision, based on the fact that eThekwini's GDP is whatever else it is, and who knows if it actually is what it is, We zoom in. You can actually zoom in. It's a project that my colleague has been working on, together with the National Treasury, etc. You can zoom in down to almost like a 4-kilometer radius and try and find out tax data information, employment, not GDP, but which sectors they're employed, obviously formal employment only, etc., that kind of thing. I think that's the kind of information that should be demanded, and there are some cities that are actually making their plans based on that. So I do know that it is a problem, but I would like to say there are cities that are using actual solid data to make their long-term decisions based on that.
Thank you so much for that answer. Program Director, members of the audience, unfortunately, we live in a world where there isn't enough time to make anything perfect. I just want to thank my panel members, Ayanda, Chipeya, Justin, as well as Siobhain. Thank you so much.
Thank you.